Now recording.
Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. I am Shogun. Today we have our second podcast interview with my good friend Trigger, or Duros, I guess we'll call him today. And he has worked with Canadian Navy Department of Public Affairs, and I guess is currently working also with the Ministry of Health. And my understanding is he's been handling phone calls related to COVID-19 / coronavirus, so I thought that would give us a really good source of information and perspective on that topic. Before we jump into it, we are the Roundtable Discord server, so don't forget to join us. Just Google Roundtable Discord to find us, or go to Disboard, and you can find us through the politics or conspiracy theory sections. We're also on all the social media, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Follow us, subscribe on all social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website, theroundtablediscord.com. That being said, hey Duros, welcome. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, Shogun. Happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for joining us today. How is the fam? Everybody healthy?
Everybody seems to be okay now. I think we actually probably had COVID over the last couple weeks. Kind of a fever came through the house. Nothing too severe, I gotta say. Like we're still questioning if that's what it was at all. But it was a fever with mild coughing. That happened once the weather had turned very sunny and nice. So in a way, it would be weird if there was anything else going around at that period. I guess it could have been the tail end of the flu season. But in our case, it was super, super mild. So hopefully they'll be able to get those antibody tests out here soon, and we'll be able to check if that's what we actually had.
All right. Well, glad you guys are feeling better. So am I correct when I said that you've been handling phone calls related to COVID? Like people have been calling in for information or something along these lines?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm with one of the provincial governments. I won't say where, just to maximize or minimize the odds that anyone will figure out who I am. But yeah, so basically we've been answering letters and phone calls, and as you'd imagine, people are panicking pretty good. It's quite a breakdown. People are unsure of exactly what's being done, and I got to say the provinces in Canada haven't been very forthcoming with the information, partially just because they don't have the information like the U.S. We just haven't been doing the number of tests required to actually have a handle on the situation. And then also different provinces have been quite using kind of the medical privacy reasoning, have been not really stating where the cases are. You just kind of give like a broad region. It's like the north part of the province, which obviously, and there's a bunch of cities there. They're like, well, is it in our city? What the hell are we supposed to do with that? And so they're, fairly justifiably pissed off, I'd say, but that's sort of decisions being made.
I see. So what is your impression overall of how severely Canada has been hit in general? And then also, well, it's two separate questions, right? So first of all, I guess, is have you been able to form any impression about, how severe COVID-19 is? Because there seems to be an awful lot of conflicting information about that. So what's your take on it? Like, how serious really is COVID? Is it being exaggerated? Is it being downplayed?
I'd say it's probably was exaggerated, although exaggeration is not really the right term, because like when you don't know and you're sort of just trying to give people worst case scenario to make them behave appropriately, it's not really exaggeration as much as just saying like this could be really bad, take precautions. And it's one of those cases where we're never going to really know how bad it could have been because precautions were taken on such a dramatic scale. But either way, from the predictions they were seeing, the number of deaths, the overwhelming of the hospitals and stuff, we're really not seeing that at all. Some hospitals are saying that like since they've cut down on all the standard other types of procedures like surgeries, like a lot of the cancer stuff has just been put on the side for the time being while they've been waiting for this influx of COVID people to hit the hospitals. And outside of the heavily afflicted areas, like New York and whatnot, it just doesn't really seem to be happening. So I feel we probably dodged a bullet on this one. Like it could obviously still be extremely bad, and once we reopen the parts of society, it will be, and there'll be another wave of it. A bunch of people will die. Like people comparing it to the flu are dumb. It's already killed way more people than the flu, despite hitting a very small percentage. of the people. So it is like potentially quite dangerous. But compared to what I think they were worried it was, it was a bit overblown.
So, how do you think Canada's situation is relative to other countries like the States? I mean, obviously the States is the leader in cases right now. Are we going to have an easier time of it? Like, where do we rate in terms of how it's affecting Canada, do you think?
I would say overall Canada's doing a fairly good job. The numbers are pretty low here. It's tricky because we know we're getting different strains. Like the New York side of the U.S. is getting the European strain that came basically over from Europe. BC and whatnot in Canada and the West Coast out here seem to have gotten basically straight from China. So there does seem to be difference in how dangerous the different strains are. Canada's pretty wealthy, fairly spread out. It got, despite getting hit pretty early because BC is facing China and has so much travel between them, it got a handle on it pretty quick. But we really just don't know what the numbers have been. I know there's a lot of countries also saying that they just don't know how many people are actually dying from it. There's a lot of confusion as to whether dose should be attributed to COVID. There's a lot of heart attacks that apparently aren't showing up in hospitals that just statistically should be. So they're wondering whether people are just having heart trouble and then saying it's still better just to tough it out at home and hope I live than it is to go get COVID at the hospital. But Canada is fairly well equipped for it. I think the people as a whole are a little more government oriented than parts of the U.S. are. Like you're not seeing these kind of militia groups saying that the lockdowns have to end. So at this point, Canada seems pretty well equipped to keep dealing with things, and that was despite having some pretty bad advice right off the start. I know I was required to be giving out some advice I didn't agree with that was coming straight from the WHO. And if you're familiar, the Director General of the WHO, he's an Ethiopian guy. I keep forgetting his name because I'm bad with Ethiopian names apparently. But he was basically heavily supported by China in getting the job. Back in Ethiopia, he was known as he was like a health minister and was known to have covered up typhoid outbreaks and basically said it was just bad cases of diarrhea in order to protect their tourism. So a bit of a sleazy guy, heavily supported by China in his bid to lead the WHO. And then he's also been, covering for China since the whole thing has been going on, for saying, just trust China stats. They're doing such a good job. Don't do travel bans with them. That would be bad. Also, the WHO was where the bad stuff, like the dumb messaging was coming out about don't wear masks. Masks won't help. When really they should have just been leveling with people and being like, yeah, masks would help. You should make your own masks, but leave the medical ones for the medical professionals because they actually need them. So I managed to kind of discredit the whole organization there, and then discredit a lot of the provincial governments, at least in Canada and other places where they were following that messaging. So all things considered, though, Canada could easily be faring a lot worse, and it's nothing like New York. We just don't have that population density in most places.
Right. So on COVID, I've heard some interesting things about like the symptoms. I've heard it can cause heart problems, can cause heart damage to people, even people who don't have existing heart problems. I've heard it can cause kidney damage. I've heard it can cause permanent scarring in the lungs, permanent lung damage. I've heard it can cause a symptom called fizzing. I don't know if you've heard of this, which is like a bizarre like burning sensation under the skin. Now they're talking about COVID toes being some kind of skin condition on the feet associated with COVID. They're saying it can cause brain damage, stroke, seizures. So it's like hard to find anything that isn't associated with this condition, which makes it seem really strange. Like, so have you been hearing about these things as well? Like these kind of weird symptoms associated with COVID? Like,
Not all the ones you just listed, but certainly the lung ones. They did a study on one of the cruise ships that came back to Japan, and they found that approximately half the people who were asymptomatic, but did have it, had lung damage that was detectable on a CT scan. So it's pretty bizarre when these people had no symptoms, but their lung damage was severe enough that you could tell by scanning them. And I have been hearing about the neurological stuff. They think it's somehow linked to the herpes virus. I don't quite exactly understand the science of it, but it seems like it's mingling weirdly with some other viruses people already have. So it might not just be, how bad the virus itself is, but what else do you have in your viral biosphere that it's going to be interacting with?
So, what are you doing when you go out in terms of protection? Do you wear masks and gloves and visors when you go out of the house to the store or something, like yourself?
Yeah, yeah. If I'm going anywhere to interact with people or go to stores or whatever, I'm definitely wearing a mask, and I'm generally just wearing sunglasses. Then just keeping hand sanitizer in my pocket that I just kind of apply as necessary whenever I interact with anything. I'm still trying to get out lots and go, running and things now that like we kind of went through our symptoms a couple of weeks ago. So I'm through it's an 8 to 10 day period where you're likely to be infectious to others, with a couple of those probably being before you become symptomatic at all. So, getting out into the sun is just extremely good for you, making sure you're getting good fresh air when you're at home. But yeah, as far as being out near people, just you don't want to be touching things and touching your face or breathing the air. It's we're going to find out. I think some of the studies are suggesting that like a much larger percentage of the people have had it and just been asymptomatic. Like some studies are saying as many as half the people who get it are asymptomatic, which could just mean anyone's breathing it on you at any time, despite how they look and feel. So you can't really trust anyone.
Bizarre, yeah. Is there any other information at all that they give you in any of your professional capacities, or that you have from other sources that you think people might not have? Any information you can give us about COVID, just whatsoever, that you think might not be public?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get a ton of it through, like, it's stuff I'm supposed to feed to the public, right? So they're not giving me big stockpiles of secret information. Was an interesting study talking about the fact that it may be an artificial virus. That is, it was a chimera created of pangolin and bat virus. So the idea is it may not have been transferred from a pangolin to a bat, because they do seem to have a little bit of both of their DNA in there, mostly bat, but a little bit of pangolin. But that may have actually been a purposely added part, which is a little bit sketchy. And now it's starting to make more sense, because the idea that this did come out of the Wuhan lab is starting to kind of become even the mainstream story. Whether or not it was, a bioweapon is, it'll be a long time till anyone can actually prove that one way or the other. But the idea that it was lab created seems pretty likely. And the scary part is apparently it's extremely easy to do this. I was reading something, and they're suggesting that basically like a grad student with some basic, I don't know, I'm not a virologist by any means, but some basic hardware that's fairly inexpensive will be able to do this. They're also wondering whether or not, if you were going to do, just to jump into fun conspiracy land for a minute, if you were going to basically short the world on the stock market, going and dumping a virus like this that you created yourself in a wet market in China, if that is what happened, it'd be very, very, very profitable if you were willing to do that. It's pretty crazy that we now have people with the incentive and the ability to quite easily create a world shutting down virus for money and make a lot of money doing it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think people need to realize. There's political motivation in terms of one superpower hurting the reputation or economy or whatever military readiness of another nation, but then there's even more likely is the economic incentive. Like you say, shorting the market, and really it's a two-step thing, right? Because first you short the market, meaning you bet different industries are going to tank. Then you release the virus, you make all these industries tank. Then you make billions of dollars because you've shorted markets like travel or whatever that then do tank the virus. Then when the stock of those corporations drops to pennies on the dollar, you can use the money you just made to buy up all these huge industries. And then when it rebounds later, you'll own huge parts of the economy. So yeah, the motivation is definitely there for the consolidation of wealth. And people posted sources here saying, in 2020, America's billionaires made $282 billion more or whatever. So people are making big profits in terms of coronavirus. The rich are getting richer for sure.
Yeah, it's basically poor people who can't, don't have sick care, don't have the ability, like they work at the types of jobs where you need to be face to face, and yeah, they're estimating that as many as half of small businesses are not going to reopen after this thing, which is pretty obscene. And you realize all that market share is going to go towards bigger companies. Not like, big companies don't all plot together to create a virus to eat up the small companies, but it does seem to be what's going to happen. It's an interesting one too. If basically, it would make a lot of sense if Jeff Bezos just did this himself. Just so it's like, all right, let's shut down all stores so everyone has to rely totally on Amazon. Not saying that happened, but it's fun to speculate.
Oh, it happened that way.
And yeah, we can open up the floor for any audience participation or questions, but I do want to make sure I ask one more question first, and after that it's open. So what do you think about the situation with Kim Jong-un? Do you think he's dead? Do you think he's going to die? And if he's going to die, what do you think that impact of that will be?
Honestly, I have no idea at this point. It sounds like the Chinese medical team went over there to treat him. In a way, it would be surprising if he didn't just die suddenly at some point, just given the nature of the regime there. They don't really know who's going to take over. His sister is sort of like a respected, talented person, but they wouldn't accept a woman leader, from what I've been reading. I honestly have no idea. Do you got any thoughts on that?
My only thought is that if he dies and they do put her in charge, it would be a good opportunity for her and for the regime to open diplomatic ties and sort of start a new chapter for the country, because, I think the international community will be very curious if they put a female in charge. People are going to be very interested in her story, you know what I mean? So the international community will be paying more attention, and then she can take that opportunity to be like, listen, I'm a new leader, I'm a woman, I have a different perspective. It's time for a new relationship with the West or whatever, if she wanted that, and if that's what the regime wants, then that would be a good sort of way to do it. I don't know. That's just what I kind of think. It would just, the death of that one leader allows them to take a different turn in with regards to foreign policy, and then potentially, I don't know how their culture is, but potentially, another man would always feel the pressure to be just as hardline and intense as the previous ruler, but maybe a woman would be able to take a softer approach. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll sort of depend on the internal politics and basically what the top people think would happen to them if they decided to open up. Are they going to be facing war crimes courts, or are they going to be, allowed to slide into a new North Korea model where it's, just going to try and catch, is it going to be like East Germany merging with West Germany, where they do just kind of they merge and then the leadership gets essentially purged out, or yeah, because if they think that they're going to be tried for war crimes, the kind of the top brass around her, then they probably will just keep defending themselves with nukes and being belligerent.
Right. Is there anything else you've been following lately? What do you think about have you heard about the giant locust swarms right now? They're 20 times bigger than the biggest ones ever seen in our lifetime.
No, that's horrific.
Yeah, there are two different continents we're getting just decimated by these locust swarms bigger than entire states. And they said they were the worst in living memory, or the worst in a lifetime. And then they went away for a short time or whatever and came back apparently 20 times worse than before. So they were already as biggest ones they'd ever seen, and they came back 20 times bigger than that. And yeah, they're ravaging Africa and the Middle East right now, and I guess even into Southeast Asia. And so the UN or whatever is predicting a biblical famine, is what they called it, because between that and COVID shutting down trade and manufacturing and the economy, combined with this unprecedented locust swarms, obviously then there'll be food shortages for millions or hundreds of millions of people. So, yeah.
Oh God, what a friggin' mess. Yeah, this is it's going to be interesting to see how the world tries to reopen after this. I think a lot of people are going to become a lot more try to become a lot more self-sufficient. It's been interesting to see China's mask kind of fully pulled away. Now you can listen to basically any podcast, and people are just straight up calling them like a bad actor, saying that they're, belligerent and deceptive, and now you have to, like, this is on like Freakonomics and kind of fairly mainstream podcasts, so they're just straight up saying that China's like they're an enemy of basically everyone at all times, and they're just kind of lying and deceiving, and people have been saying that for a long time, but it's now just kind of the common theme about them. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the kind of the change of the world looks like. Or our big Western countries going to try and move their corporations to more like India and Vietnam, and then try and move away. And yeah, it's going to be a giant reshaping with a lot of dead people.
There's like some naval news too that Trump and Iran were like threatening each other. The Iranian boats are threatening Trump's boats, and then Trump said he would blow up any Iranian boats, and then the Iranians said they would blow up American boats. Have you followed that at all? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just Iran trying to draw some attention away from their own internal handling of the COVID thing, because they did a really sloppy job right off the start, and they think they're going to have a lot of dead people, and they're one of those regimes where you don't know how many, but I'm sure the people inside realize that things were not taken care of very well. So if you can, it's Iran, it's always a pleasing message to the people to say that, we're standing up to the U.S., like screw them. So that's sort of my theory of what's going on there. I don't predict anything real happening out of it.
Is there any other political flashpoints going on right now, or any other international news you're watching?
I'm sure there is. The COVID's kind of sucked the air out of the room, unfortunately, so I'm not following it too much. It'll be the most interesting is just going to be to see what happens in countries like Africa and or continents like Africa and South America as COVID comes out and just really ratchets up the tension between countries. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see if it's an interesting kind of end to the populism that's been sweeping around in India and Brazil and Turkey and everywhere else, just because the kind of the populist strongman leaders have not been handling this very well for the most part. Although India actually is an interesting case. I don't know if you follow them at all, but they have very, very few cases considered it's India, and they're probably not testing enough at all. But they did do a pretty dramatic lockdown right near the start. So it's interesting to see how different countries are handling this. But no, I don't have any other major interesting things.
Do you think that this will result in some kind of a new world order advancement in the regards of, anything from, mandatory vaccinations to RFID chipping or martial law scenarios playing out, or anything along that line? Or do you think it's going to be a return to normality, or do you think that there'll be some kind of increased social control that comes about because of this that is last into the future?
I suspect there will be. Governments are definitely going to get new powers out of this, and they never give them back after. So I think that's more or less assured. Exactly, and the fact is people are going to be asking for it. And honestly, maybe in certain regards they need to, just because I think this has kind of opened our eyes to what happens to a modern world when you get hit by an epidemic. Unfortunately, this one wasn't that bad, but it could easily be much, much worse, to the point where, like Sam Harris refers to as latchkey totalitarianism, where you basically have to be able to just shut down your system.
Did you cut out, or is it my end?
Yeah, you cut out.
You there, Duros? Try leaving and coming back, if you can hear me. If anyone else wants to ask questions or make comments on anything, feel free.
I wanted to know if any of the standard precautions that are in place now, like wearing masks, certain dividers being placed at store registers, if any of that is possibly going to stay in place or become a standard for most locations after this is all, I wouldn't say said and done with, but...
Handshaking is likely over for good.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Overdue that we change that custom. I don't know, he cut out. I texted him to reconnect, but we'll see if he does. I don't know what happened to him.
I put it in chat, but I'm interested in the idea that maybe infection is more or less inevitable, and that all we're doing while waiting for a vaccine is trying to keep the rate of new cases manageable.
Like postponing.
Is that better?
You there, Duros?
Okay, I lost you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
we hear
boss.
you now. Sorry. There was a question. If anyone wants to repeat their question.
I was wondering if there's any standard precautions that are going to stay in place after Corona's subsided. For instance, clear dividers being at registers at stores, or wearing masks maybe certain times of the year, or wearing gloves, or taking extra precautions during flu season. Do you think anything like that's going to stay in place?
God, I hope so. A lot of the stores have those dividers. They look fairly permanently installed, and I don't know if they'll ever bother to really get rid of them, or at least they'll have them be able to snap back up super quickly. Maybe the handshake will be dead. I doubt it, actually. The handshake's fairly well ingrained in certain types of people, but I think we'll probably do it less with strangers. And hopefully society just opens up a little bit more idea to just wearing masks, like the Asian model of just, you wear a mask when you're sick for the good of everybody else. They kind of wear those ugly medical ones most of the time, which is a little strange, because usually anything practical like that you sort of make fashionable eventually, like they did it with eyeglasses. They were, a helpful tool that you eventually made kind of look nice for your face. So should do that with masks as well, I would think. But yeah, maybe people will actually wash their hands when they use the washroom now.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is it confirmed, of a definite time of how long this quarantine or lockdown is going to last, or is it just rumors?
I don't think anyone has any good information on that yet. People are going to kind of try, like Georgia's about to try, and people will see what happens to them. In Canada, the provinces are estimating kind of mid-May they want to start rolling back some of the stuff. Still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. That wasn't me,
Okay.
though. That was not
Somebody
me.
have a crazy bird? But yeah, basically, like the data's still not there. Once they have the antibody tests and they found out what percentage of the people have already had it, and just have enough testing capacity to be able to kind of test anyone as needed, it'll should be able to kind of permanently open stuff back up and then just close as needed. But they are trying to for mid-May. I know in a lot of the Canadian provinces trying to start doing at least dental surgery and physiotherapy and all this stuff, because it's my brother-in-law just lost his job to it the other day, and you just sort of realize like it was just a good eye waking up period for just the number of services people are lacking now, just the amount of just kind of the screws are tightening on so many different groups and so many things that people legitimately need. And if we don't start opening it back up, there's going to be a whole lot of mental health issues, a whole lot of suicide, a whole lot of just people like economically collapsing. And I don't know if we'll really, it has to be undone fairly soon.
I have a question for you. Have you heard about this medical treatment that has been allegedly been told on the internet that it cured many people with severe illness by COVID-19? It's called something has to do with the chlorohydroxine and zinc combined together. They give them like in large doses or whatever doses they need, and they're cured.
Honestly, no. I'm not super familiar with the various cures that are being kind of ran out. Does it sound promising?
I mean, I don't know. Have you heard anything about it? Like, does it work? Does it not work? Is it being used already in hospitals? Or
No, definitely not being used in the hospitals already. At least not here. Maybe there's some places where they're running it out, but at this point, there doesn't seem to be any ready-to-go cures that are actually working and actually being moved out at scale that I'm aware of. At least not in Canada. We tend to be kind of a little bit behind the eight ball on a lot of things, so we usually wait till somebody else has already tried it before we try. So it's possible, but at this point, I'm not aware of anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
No, it's fine. Does anyone else has a question?
I had a couple. So, what do you think is the backlash or the aftermath of Trump cutting funding completely of the WHO? And as far as like the allegations you made of the guy in charge, the Ethiopian guy who covered up the the epidemic in Ethiopia and seems to be covering for China's mishaps.
Yeah. So what's the question?
Just what do you think the aftermath of Trump cutting from or
Oh,
cutting
okay, I gotcha.
cutting from the WHO? Yeah, you know, guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming he'll probably get talked into ultimately not doing it. My guess would be that they will and should take a stronger role in making sure that the WHO's hasn't been super politicized by China. If he really does jump the funding to the WHO, then that's basically giving up the US's say in how it operates at all, which is not a great idea for them. And at that point, China will get a larger say because they'll be able to contribute more of the funding to it. So my guess, though, is he'll get walked back, probably demand some concessions from it, which is overall, I think, probably the best answer for everybody if that is what happens.
So, wouldn't cutting funding to the WHO, isn't that kind of a sign that we're trying to get away from their jurisdiction? The same thing with the cutting of the funding of the UN, because he's already axed it.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, yes. Like a lot of the U.S. hasn't been following a lot of the WHO guidance already, like certainly not his part of the administration. So the governors have been taking a lot more cues from the WHO. But yeah, that basically is it. The U.S. is trying to basically suggest that it's not a very useful part to their. It's not very useful for their governing. It's pumping out bad information, that it's biased in favor of a country who seems to be lying a lot about what's going on. Yeah, honestly, the U.S. after World War II built all these institutions, and a lot of them are fairly broken. Like the UN hasn't successfully really done much in quite a long time. The WHO was way behind on the mask thing and a bunch of other things during this pandemic. So, I'm not a huge fan of how Trump unilaterally goes about picking fights with everybody instead of cooperating with his logical allies to make reasonable changes happen. Instead, he just kind of insults everybody and then throws a temper tantrum, which isn't the best way to do it. But he is right. Like NATO was not paying their bills. The UN has been failing on essentially everything for quite a long time, and is responsible for huge amounts of like rape and stuff when their peacemakers go abroad, which is bizarre. And the WHO was pumping out bad information during a pandemic and covering for China. So I sympathize with Trump on that a bit. I'd say he'd better off trying to change it than he is trying to totally rebuild it or go outside and make his own like new institution though. So hopefully he'll figure that out.
So what is my final question? What is the likelihood of this coming to like an international court session over fraud and crimes against humanity and all that between China and the WHO and the Wuhan Institution or the Biochemistry Lab along with the Bill Gates Foundation?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. My guess is that nothing really stands at the geopolitical level. People just kind of deny it, and the kind of global courts are basically impossible to do anything successfully against a major power anyway. So yeah, my guess is that I think there's already some states in the U.S. trying to sue China, like Michigan is maybe. But it's not going to go anywhere. China just won't recognize it.
Yeah, Mississippi is one of the states that.
Right.
Yeah.
Duros, I have a question, if you don't mind. For people who are isolating, can you talk about whether infection is just more or less inevitable, and is what we're doing really just managing the rate of new infections so we don't overwhelm our infrastructure? And are people going to have to basically decide when to take their guard down and expose themselves?
Yeah. I mean, that's always been it. Like, unless we build up enough herd immunity that by the time, like, if you're one of the last people to get it, maybe you won't get it. Although if it does linger around, like we sort of think it's going to, then eventually, basically, we will all get it, whether this year or next year, because it'll do the thing that viruses do, and it basically moves from north to south during the season changes. But basically, we will all get it. The question is, viruses. This is a really rapidly changing virus because it's RNA. So it apparently changes 100 times faster than DNA changing viruses. I don't understand the science. That's what I've heard. And so basically, viruses do move towards less dangerous over time because if they're too dangerous, they kill off their host. So that's why the common cold and these other coronaviruses, like all the common cold making up viruses, have become fairly minor by this point, right? They want to spread around. They, they'll take a while to show symptoms, and then they jump from person to person so that they're reproducing without ever killing off the host. Because it's like that's why Ebola crisis ends so quickly, is because if everybody dies, then there's no one left to spread it. So yeah, it's basically we're just trying to not overwhelm the healthcare system. So and they're purposely going to, once they start opening society back up, as the plan is for mid-May here, they're totally expecting a bunch more people to get it and get another wave of it, and then they'll just have to shut things down again. Say, all right, look, a bunch more people got it. Let's let it spread out again. Let's let the hospitals get close to capacity, and then do it again and do it again and do it again until it's over. So.
I have a question. Do you know anything regarding the people dying because of ventilators crushing their lungs, or anything that ventilator has worsened certain people's cases?
Yeah, I've been hearing this. I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. Whether it's, there are some suggestions that it has more to do with the virus damaging the hemoglobin ability to carry oxygen, in which case the respirator's not actually really helping at that point. Whether it's making things worse or those are just very sick people because they give the ventilators to the sick people. So whether it's just not really doing anything beneficial and they're just the sickest or not, I'm not exactly sure. But there is some theories going around with what COVID actually does to people, that the ventilator is not actually very helpful, and that basically we're slowly the blood, like things are still getting pumped, the lungs are still working to pump to oxygenate, to pump oxygen in and whatnot, but that the hemoglobin's not really retaining it, so we're still kind of just like suffocating even with the ventilators. I don't know exactly where that stands, though. That's just what I heard.
See, this ties into another question, the herd immunity thing, and just accepting that you have to be exposed to it is kind of confusing, because they're saying now there's evidence that you don't basically get any immunity to COVID, which is one of the strange things about it. They're saying, in other words, that having been infected already is no real protection against getting it again. And the problem is that it also does permanent damage, they say, to your lungs and so forth. So the fact that you can get reinfected means that we essentially have to keep our maximum protective, protocols in place even after you get it once. You essentially still have to be just as concerned about getting it again, because each subsequent infection could make it worse. And then the really alarming thing is they published a study recently that said that on average, being infected with COVID reduces your lifespan, but your life expectancy by 10 years. And that's an average, meaning that, half the people it's more than that, and half the people it's less. And that's regardless of age. So it's like, fuck, you really have to be concerned about getting this. And they're talking it can cause impotence or infertility. So it's like we basically are going to have to be on pandemic footing indefinitely with this one. Even if you got it before, you have to be even more concerned about getting it again, basically.
I'm still not 100% sure that the people getting it more than once is actually happening, because I know a lot of the cases, I think that was from a study out of South Korea, saying that they were seeing that, but it's fairly possible that that was the early days of testing when the testing wasn't super good yet. So there's a good chance there was a lot of false positives, meaning people thought they had it and then got it for real, or they got it for real and then got it again, but it turned out it wasn't it the second time. So we're still not quite sure that you can get it twice, at least not likely the strain that's going through your own region. It's possible if you got it one place, then traveled somewhere else, the strain elsewhere would be different enough that your immunity would be useless, essentially. So I'm still a little bit up in the air as to whether or not that's possible. They say because it changes so quick, though, that your immunity won't last very long anyway. So they're thinking the best estimate I've heard is maybe a year. You might get a year away from it, assuming it's the same strain. So yeah, it does sound like we will have to be on fairly. I honestly don't know. Like the stuff coming about the various types of damage is so new, and it's still they're not sure how many of the people get it, whether all the strains give it, whether like there's people with different blood types that are more resistant to it, like blood type O is more resistant to it, women are more resistant to it, certain ethnicities seem to do better than others, maybe that's just blood type, and so yeah, I mean, it's possible that will be something that goes around. It'll just be like a common cold, except able to do permanent damage every time. For that study, you said it knocked 10 years off their life. That was they said that was irrespective of age. So that just happened to anyone?
So if it's an average overall, so you take every single person in the community who's infected, and then you factor their life expectancy and compare it to the average. So yeah,
how much of that is in deaths?
Yeah, because if old people are dying and losing 15 years, like an old diabetic person, and then maybe they're making up most of the lost years, while young people are actually
they still would be making up a lot of it for sure. But that tells you something too, that if it's the old people dying, then the number of years that they're losing wouldn't be that high. So the fact that you're on average losing 10 years off your life means these weren't just people who only had a few years left, right? I mean, regardless of how you slice it, and granted that, even given this being the case, the old or whatever are going to make up more of it, it's clearly something that's not just like you get it, you recover, and then if you don't die, you're fine, right? Like a lot of times people go, why are you worried about the fatality rate is so low? And it's like, well, yeah, that's not really the point, though. It seems like people don't really recover well from this. Like a lot of people have like lasting damage. So that's why it's quite concerning. It's like you don't really recover to full health.
Yeah, no, it's true. The big problem we still have at this point is we still don't have a denominator for finding out just how many people have actually had it, right? So all of the statistics looking at how many years you look or how many years you lose, how sick you are on average, all that stuff is based on people who had it quite severe. So once we find out how many people have actually had it, how many were asymptomatic and just had nothing, then we'll have a better idea. But it definitely, and like we'll also find out if it does come back and it's one that you're able to catch again once your immunity wears off in, say, a year, whether you'll still have some immunity to it. Will it protect you partially, or will it be a total loss of immunity? Right now, everything there's just so much speculation, but yeah, it does sound like it's going to be something that actually does lasting damage, which is not something we're really used to with viruses or diseases from the standard kind that you don't worry about.
It also sounds like a moving target for a vaccine.
Yeah, it does. That's why we've never had a coronavirus vaccine before. It'd be nice to be able to have a vaccine for the common cold, but we just don't. It's hard to do, and we don't know how to do it.
Also, another thing, too, I've seen is there's a possibility they're going to be locking us down like this every year during the flu season and whatnot. They'll do this every year, lock everything down for 2 months.
Well, yeah, the gentleman that was just talking a minute ago, he was saying this, and they actually, MIT Technology Review came out and they did an article basically like the first week of all this nonsense happening, and it was like an article like, that just like looked like they kind of had it ready, it was like they were pretty much ready to come out and say this, but yeah, it's as easy as for them to just basically say, oh, we're experiencing a surge in ICUs at these hospitals. Therefore, we need to implement these social distancing, restrictions, in these, zones and stuff. So yeah, it's literally going to be as easy as that. It's going to be as easy as them just saying a couple of words, and then we're just in lockdown, and you can't go out, and they're calling it, and they actually dubbed it the quote unquote shut in economy. So these periods of time, where these companies are all shut off and stuff. And I don't know. It just seems like even though everything where I'm at is open, pretty much everything, it's just everything is all a little bit different. It's just really weird.
Yeah, yeah, it's nerve-wracking what this is going to look like after. Like, it's hard to imagine a lot of things even coming back. Like movie theaters have to, like, are they going to come back? Cruise ships should probably be dead anyway. Like, just the idea of restaurants and having other people cook your food and being around them, concerts, sporting events. It's hard to imagine this stuff's gonna really be able to rebound as much as people want to. And yeah, the idea that you're just going to kind of regularly shut down the economy. I got to say, I was listening to it wasn't a podcast. It was a video online just talking about the various ways the boomers have screwed the younger generations. Talking about the housing market, the global warming, the massive amounts of national debt, housing prices, and how they've been pumped up out of young people's reach. And a little bitter part of me just kind of says, it's like, all right, well, here's like another sort of my least charitable part of me just starts like, well, here's another like bailout for the boomers. It's like just to let them get as old as possible. We'll just have to like shut down the world economy, and everyone has to hide inside for long periods of time. Like, I mean, if it's as bad as it could be, then that's what we have to do, and it's good for everybody. But on the other hand, when I'm feeling spiteful, I'm sort of just like, I guess we'll just protect the old people from the young. They'll kind of sacrifice their youth.
We can be grateful this didn't happen before the internet got reasonably competent.
That's true. Yeah, if we didn't have the internet, this could be pretty friggin' awful.
Have the Discord server during these times of lockdown, have a community of people you can talk to and chat with, makes it a lot nicer. It'd be brutal without that. It'd be truly like in solitary confinement. You'd be going crazy. But I don't know if NSA is here right now or not, but he would want to ask what your opinion is on like UFOs and the extraterrestrial phenomenon. I mean, I'm sure obviously your job in the Navy doesn't even approach that level of clearance that they would talk about that. But what is your personal take on that? Do you think that's like just where do you stand on it?
I am here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely don't get that kind of clearance. I mean, it seems that they're there. I don't know what they're doing. It would be like my biggest dream, just I think for the good of humanity, nothing would be better than an unfalsifiable alien event that would be able to, nothing unites humans like an enemy or a threat. Well, other than COVID apparently, but like an alien threat, something with a face. So yeah, I think it'd be pretty great if whatever they're doing out there, if they could come make themselves known, so it kind of forces us to get our shit together and realize that we can't be, we're not actually very different, and we can't afford to be wasting all our time pointing weapons at each other and refusing to take care of the planet because, crisis of the commons, if we just allow, well, hopefully they'll take care of their part of the planet and we don't have to. So, I believe they're out there. I believe that they're doing something. I sort of thought I saw one when I was little, so that's sort of stuck in my brain. And it'd be nice if they'd make a show right now.
Have you ever had a personal sighting of a UFO or anything like that?
Yeah. A couple of things out in Ontario. We had a cottage that was quite deep in the woods, and I know there's one time where we'd go out on our deck or on our docks at night, you'd just be hanging out and we'd yell at the other docks and stuff. But everybody saw some glowing lights above this big rocky cliff and then saw a bunch of black helicopters fly by a few minutes later. And we all used to meet at the train tracks every few weeks then to basically coordinate on things like roads and just some of the local like infrastructure and whatnot, and everybody seemed to have seen it and just kind of wondering what the hell it was. And then I personally, when I was like 12, so you can take that for what it is, was lying in the bed, just looking out the window, and there's this weird blue glowing orb just kind of slowly drifting towards the cottage, just kind of up a path. And then it seems like it would have been a dream, but I remember jumping out of my bed and like jumping into my parents' bed, and then when I woke up, I was still in their bed. So it seems like at least the part of me jumping in there and then being scared of something was real. But 12 or whatever. How about you? Does anyone have any great alien stories?
No, not me.
NSA had some contact. Go ahead, sir.
If I wasn't aware of what it actually was, I might have interpreted my sleep paralysis event as an alien. But because I woke up, I couldn't move. There was a feeling of a malevolent presence in the room, and a slinky black shadow that I perceived, like walking, leaving the door.
Yeah. So I've come
the
to.
same...
Oh, I thought you were done. Your light went off. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. But that's the same thing that people interpreted as succubus and witches sitting on their chests and so on. I've never seen it craft or anything.
Well, so I've come to learn that these beings actually can focus light very accurately, and so like lasers and shit, so they can put an image over your eyes while you're in REM sleep and manipulate your dream state. And I have a feeling that's why they call Area 51 Dreamland, because they are aware of these technologies that they're interacting. That's why the gods used to give us dreams and shit like that. So I think sleep paralysis is majorly ET contact, or at least one of their methods of them interacting with us.
Interesting. Very interesting.
The sleep paralysis is terrible.
Yeah, well, and I think it's usually, people usually encounter it as very frightening, right? Because obviously being paralyzed is not an unpleasant feeling, and then a large part of the time there's some kind of malevolent, frightening entity near your bed, so obviously there's very few things as uncomfortable as being paralyzed when there's some kind of demon or witch beside your bed. It can be a little bit frightening for most people. But I do point out that, even though we have this concept of sleep paralysis, that's not actually an explanation, right? So people are like, oh, I had this experience, but it was just sleep paralysis. Well, we don't know what that is, really. We don't know why we know, we have a theory of why you get paralyzed, because when you go to sleep, your body is paralyzed, so you don't act out your dream. That makes sense. But why do these weird hostile...
Your perception... What you perceive does tend to be influenced by your belief system. Like, Arabs will report jinn in the room and will describe them in the ways they've been depicted in culture. And alien sightings were, converged around the image of the gray alien once that image became part of popular culture. Prior to that, they diverged greatly.
Well, most people don't experience gray aliens. Some people do experience gray aliens, but it's more commonly like a dark figure, a demon, a witch. I've heard all kinds of variations of it. But the point is, just because it occurs during the state of sleep paralysis doesn't actually mean it's not a supernatural experience or an encounter with, for example, an interdimensional entity or a demon or something of that nature, so I'm not saying it is that. I'm just saying simply because we have the term sleep paralysis doesn't mean that isn't still a somewhat unaccounted for phenomenon. And I'll just mention there's 2 good free documentaries you can see on YouTube. One is called The Entity and one is called The Nightmare. And they go into detail about how this is like a universal phenomenon all around the world, and it's basically still mysterious. But
I had King Kong for one of mine. It was pretty weird. This old kid from I used to go to school with back in elementary school runs into my bedroom. He's like, hide, and climbs under my desk. And I'm lying in bed and can't move. And this giant gorilla arm and eye sticking through the side, just looking through his arm, starts feeling it smashing around in my room. It's pretty freaky.
Yeah. I haven't had much sleep paralysis, and it is worth mentioning that if you ever have sleep paralysis, try and relax and just focus on floating up out of your body, because sleep paralysis is actually the state where you're primed for an out-of-body experience, and one way to escape from the sleep paralysis is to astral project or have an out-of-body experience. So if you're prone to sleep paralysis, it's actually really fortunate, because if you just do a little bit of practice, you can learn to have out-of-body experiences.
Apparently, it's apparently much more common when you sleep in somewhere unfamiliar. They say it happens more in hotels if you're traveling, and if I used to sleep at work when I wasn't really supposed to, and I think my nervous system was aware and uncomfortable with that, and I would constantly get sleep paralysis there. So I think there's something to the unfamiliarity and your brain not shutting down as comfortably.
I mean, at the risk of sounding closed-minded, your body paralyzes, your brain paralyzes your body while you're asleep, so you don't inadvertently injure yourself. And the explanation that it's just a misfiring of that mechanism, and why it's accompanied by these hallucinations, or if you insist, contact is I guess mysterious.
Well, yeah, I already mentioned that when I spoke earlier. I said the reason that you're paralyzed is to stop you from acting out your dreams, but why that is accompanied by these beings is mysterious. Exactly. But yeah, as regards UFOs, I've seen UFOs. I've seen, basically these big orange light floating silently in the sky that were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And then shortly afterwards, like a green or greenish white light that was clear and smaller came to the same point in the sky and was hovering there. And then when we approached it, it took off and flew off horizontal, and we pursued it. And it very much seemed as though the second light was investigating the first ones because it came to the exact same spot. So we saw two different kinds of UFOs in the same area in the same night. And it made me think there was definitely something unusual going on there because it very much seemed like the second craft or whatever it was like investigating where the orange orbs had been. And the orange orbs just like phased out and disappeared, but the white one flew away along the horizon. So I thought that one was maybe a human vehicle that was investigating something different. But they were very large, right? They couldn't have been anything I've ever seen before. Like, couldn't have been a helicopter, plane, drone, star, planet. Like, so yeah, I don't know what they were, but.
Yeah, I never once had sleep paralysis until age 29, and since my contact, it's been at least once a week. So I can attest to the link between it, but whatever you want, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll post those documentaries later again, the entity ones. It's very strange.
And there seems to be an increased number of sleep paralysis victims in psych wards, which would give merit to the fact that they are testing on the mentally disabled or psychologically damaged to research mental illnesses that would be inherent in the human condition because they're, quote, researchers, that they want to learn how to control people and stuff like that.
Right.
What's everyone's impression of... Sorry, I was going to say, what's everybody's impression of... Are aliens all malevolent? Or if there are different ones investigating each other? Do we have different aliens we're interacting with, or is this all...
I hope there's other ones investigating the ones interacting, because the ones that we made a whatever treaty with are not our best interests in mind. They like to play demons. They even will call themselves demons because they think it's funny, because humans will listen to these creatures in a demonic form. If you're Christian, Catholic, you might listen as an angelic form, but they tend to... fear is what they're looking to figure out how to control humans, and fear is an easy way to make people shut off their higher functioning region. So they scare the shit out of them, and then they can get people to do things. So I don't know. I hope there's good ones. What do you think?
I mean, I don't have any insider information about aliens, but I do think it's interesting to look at what people say. And they call it exopolitics. So basically, if you look at exopolitics, the reptilian aliens are universally thought to be hostile, malevolent, evil. The gray aliens seem to be pretty evil. If you look at some of the shit they're associated with: cattle mutilations, abductions, the probing, anal probing, implants. They create hybrids. So the grays seem kind of sinister. The ones that are supposed to be good are the tall whites / Nordics. So they basically look like these tall, beautiful, white-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. These ones are counted as the Nordics, yeah. And the Nordics or Aryans or whatever you call them. I think they're sometimes also thought to be the Venusians. So there's talk of Val Valiant Thor, the stranger at the Pentagon, is described as like a really beautiful, just white guy. These are the Venusians. The Venusians are supposed to be good. The Nordics are supposed to be good. The tall whites. And then there's also the blue avians, but I mean, I don't believe the blue avians are real. They seem to be some kind of a silly thing, but people believe in them now. A guy named Corey Good talks about the blue avians or the Arcturians who are going to help us out. So that's basically the breakdown. There's also the mantis ones, which I'm not sure if those are supposed to be malevolent or benevolent, but that's kind of the breakdown. The reptilians or the grays are the bad ones, the blue avians and the tall whites or the Nordics are the good ones, basically, based on what we have.
Them all.
There's so much disinfo out there, though. So, like, they've been doing this shit for 70 years in the United States alone. I would be very cautious of any information. There isn't a researcher and a guy that he does interviews. He's a psychiatrist that does interviews for those that get abducted, and he has a collection of stories. Shit like that. That's where you can get the credible, decent info from, even though that's still manipulated heavily. Because a lot of the stuff out there that's shot around the internet is just distraction from the real story. And I've been told this by the reticulans themselves. Like they're the bad ones. They're the ones that are like putting blame on other people too. Like they're so fiendish and can mold reality to such an extent because of their technology. Whether it comes to like internet-based hacking and faking things, fake videos, all kinds of. Basically, the CIA learns everything they've ever learned from them.
Yeah, and there's also just a narrative that I heard that I think is interesting, which is that when humans encountered extraterrestrials, they were given two different options, right? Humans wanted the technology, and they were given two options. One was by the Venusians, and their option was, we'll give you our technology, but you have to disarm all your nuclear weapons, because they go against, like, the rules or whatever. You can't have these. And then the gray aliens said, well, you can keep your nuclear weapons, but you have to give us like humans to experiment on and abduct. And the argument was that they were going to go with the Venusians, but they were too afraid that that was a trick to like disarm themselves so that the aliens could take over. So they went with the grays, and that's why they have been trafficking the humans, as NSA talks about all the time, because that was the contract they entered into for the technology.
Yeah, and whoever is in charge of it in the military is, damn it.
Is there anything else been on your mind lately, Duros, or any other topics you wanted to get into today?
I was gonna say, I always wondered with the alien probing thing, if that was just us projecting, because that's like what we would do if we got some other species from the galaxy, just like stick things in their butts. Just seems like a human way to do it.
They're very scientific, so I don't know if the probing thing for sure or not, but almost every situation discusses like genetic material being taken from a person, very scientific and experimental about the person, almost like a pet or something like that, checking your vitals and things like that. So yeah, the probe thing might be there. I mean, they're very interested in our sex, our relationships, because they want to learn how to control us through those sexual desires and interpersonal relationships and societal norms of sex and things like that. So kinks are of interest to them, as is the CIA, because I mean, how to control a person better than through sex? That's a tactic used since Babylon. But yeah, I mean, they want to figure out our sexual habits, and it changes with the generations, obviously.
I mean, would it take more than one abduction to figure out the human rectum? It's not the most interesting part of the human. You would think they would spend their time on the brain.
I could tell you this, it's a disturbing part. Like, when you, for mind control, they would rape young people in the butt, because in the rectum it would like create this, the trauma was so bad it would create an altar within the mind that they could then program through telepathy. And this is what's called satanic ritual abuse, and that's why they do. It's very disturbing stuff. But the occult, and ETs and Satanism all tie together. So if you don't believe me, then you're naive.
My mother was very into this and falsely accused my father of all that nonsense. So my early life was defined by that.
Well, it happened in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm sorry if it happened to you, but it does happen, and it's as a result of cults that are formed by interacting with these technologies. The ETs convince.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean the fact that you can have satanic panic, which is the phenomenon of like false memories and false accusations and hysterias. They call these moral panics, like witch crazes. Everybody accuses each other of being witches or satanic child molesters. So there is that, but then there is also the phenomenon of actual satanic ritual abuse, which also exists, right? So your mother could have had delusions or some kind of psychosis or schizophrenia that caused her to, think that was happening when it wasn't. But at the same time, it does also, unfortunately, occur in real life as well.
Yeah, the fucked up part about the ET scenario on Earth is it's a lot darker than anybody wants to admit, and has a rich history and some very, very sick shit going on planet Earth.
Shit, all right, guys. My lad just woke up, so I got to go take care of him. It was awesome talking with you all. And yeah, everybody gets a good focus. Yeah.
We appreciate you taking the time, and we should do this again anytime you want. We cover lots more subjects, but yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks, brother. Take care.
Awesome. Take care, homie. Peace, guys.
Peace. All right, guys. So that concludes this podcast. Thanks very much for participating. Just remember, we're the Roundtable Discord server. You can find us just by Googling Roundtable Discord. Go to Discord, find us through politics or conspiracy theories. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all social media, and on the roundtablediscord.com, which is our website. We'll be doing more podcasts soon. We have a debate between Catholicism and Gnosticism tomorrow. The flat Earth debate between Sir Pauly and Sir Shattuck and Sir Dougleton will also be rescheduled. The cannibalism podcast will be rescheduled if I didn't piss the cannibal off too much today. And yeah, we got lots of good shit coming up. So let's jump to the regular roundtable room now, please. We'll just